While Isaiah Collier's freshman year at USC didn't meet expectations and included him missing time with a hand injury, he still managed to show many of the elements that made him one of the potential top picks and the #1 overall recruit in his high school class. At 6'2.5" without shoes and 200 plus pounds, he's a physical guard and one of the premier playmakers available. He uses his physicality and quickness to get to the paint and makes plays for others routinely. Now he'll need to continue working on his shot, his defense, and limiting turnovers to make an impact as easily, but as one of the better creators, he's someone that's still worth considering as high as the lottery. Now, Collier's ability to get to the rim and put pressure on the defense as a driver will likely continue to be his biggest strength. His combination of speed and physicality make him someone that's very difficult to stay in front of, and he created a lot of unassisted rim attempts this year. He's tough to move off of his driving lanes, he's got a solid handle, and he did a good job of using his body in close, and despite exclusively being a below the rim finisher, he converted at a solid clip and showed some creativity. He also played at multiple speeds with impressive acceleration, and he got to the free throw line a ton, with defenders having a tough time dealing with him and keeping him out of the paint. Now in the pick and roll, he used all those same attributes along with some real craft and nuance. He rejects well, he did an excellent job of keeping defenders on his hip or in jail, and weaved his way to find good angles at the rim, all in a way that I don't think got the proper respect as the year progressed. There's a lot more to scoring in the pick and roll that he'll need to improve, but using the ball screen to get to the paint and draw help, that's stuff that he does routinely well. And you go back and watch what he did in a game like Washington on the road, where he scored 8 points in the last 2.5 minutes and sealed the win. That type of stretch is what made and still makes him appealing as a creator and downhill driver, and I think he'll benefit maybe the most of anyone in this class playing in NBA spacing.
In fact, 16 family and friends that Collier has in attendance. And there's the free throw line. Collier in with the finish. Nice job. Allen's going to drive, gets past De Silva, kick out Collier. Collier driving into traffic, banks it in. 4% for the field that game in Seattle. DJ Rodman also had a big game as the offense. Right up to
there you go. Collier on the cross.
Wow. Collier decided by 6 points or fewer. Earn another tight one here. Collier spinning through the paint. Oh, what a finish! Here's Collier using the screen. Turns on the Jets, finishes out. Game this year, he said, I think that loss may be the greatest gift to me as a coach. What a snap back to Collier, defended by Wheeler. 6 on the shot clock. Collier trying to get free again, and he does it again. Yeah, Collier staying in the game for the Trojans. Page is just one of those. Oh, wow. Okay, Kenny.
Ted Boyle is making sure Mike Littlewood, the crew chief for tonight's game, hears about it.
He was at his absolute best in the open floor. When he turns it on, he's one of those few players that can make it seem like everyone else is running in slow motion. And even among NBA level athletes, I think he'll eventually have the same ability to look like he's a step ahead out there. Sure, he can get out of control at times, which we'll detail more later, but for the most part, he created numerous opportunities for early offense at the bucket, and it also showed up in the stat sheet as his most efficient play type on the season.
To get it to 10 as Collier gets in. Wow. Collier, the side.
Nobody really able to get anything going from three-point range. 10 of the 14-point score to come in the paint.
And then Wusu comes in, gets the rebound. Collier picks the pocket and takes off. And another turnover by Washington. Collier up ahead of the pack, and he lays it in. Good hands by Ellis, getting the deflection. Collier, the exclamation point. Too strong. That was pretty good man-to-man defense by USC. What a nice pass that was. Johnson to Collier.
Ball knocked away, and here comes Collier.
Collier also remains as gifted as anyone in the class as a passer and playmaker. His vision, his passing versatility, and of course being able to get downhill and draw the defense makes him a consistent threat. He routinely made plays off the live dribble on kickouts. He can make dump-offs and wraparounds to bigs and likes using that underhanded pass. And he plays well off the baseline, making reads to the corner and slot. In the pick and roll, he has solid feel for his options and where the defense is at. I liked how he set up screens. He did a solid job of navigating different coverages there, and he often hit cutters from a few different spots on the floor, among other things. Now, he made plenty of mistakes along the way as a young guard, but for any class, and not just this one, there aren't a ton of freshmen capable of generating offense and making the types of passes that he did.
Along with Grant Hill, who runs USA basketball, literally think through it.
Here's Collier,
Feeds it underneath. Stack wins, build some confidence going into the Pac-12 tournament. Nice backdoor cut by Ellis. It wouldn't fall.
Shot clock is 3, has to let it go. Here's Rodman.
This is the kind of game the Bears have to win as they try to build this program.
It's been Colby. Team there down low.
What a pass.
Ellis, nice pass. Collier sends it out to Johnson for the triple. It's good.
Case, I've caught a lot of plays like that.
Yeah.
Artery left open.
Collier through traffic. Nice dish to Morgan, who is fouled.
Their best deep shooter, but showed the mid-range there. Iwuchukwu left 10 points. He's 1 of 8, yet his team is still up. Morgan had trouble. Shot clock at 7. Nice pass to a cutting shot.
Collier set up here with Miller. He drives, kicks out. Here's a 3 in the corner. It's Sellers.
USC and the Cardinal, the home whites, the 8 seed, Washington. As Kobe Johnson lines it up.
Yeah, Tingle also telling us too, that's another reason why he wants to build up this young group, because he believes they can be a threat in that.
Without the 2 veteran other guards, perimeter players, it's got to affect your offensive continuity a little bit on the floor.
That's a great point.
Whoa.
Coming 11 threes by Washington. Boogie Ellis from deep and a 3. Boogie Ellis.
In more of a transition setting, he also stood out and might be even more dangerous as a passer than he is as a scorer. I still would like to see a few more hit-aheads rather than always racing up the floor himself, but he found his teammates consistently in open court. Overall, he can get caught trying to make the more impressive pass instead of the right one at times. I think that's something that should get adjusted alongside better teammates and less guys that make simple mistakes, but that and some of his inaccuracy was noticeable at different points of the season. But even with that being said, he's an impressive passing talent and at the very least belongs in the conversation with the other playmakers this class has to offer.
Shot. Collier. Drop it.
Now, for a good portion of the season, Collier's biggest issue was his turnovers and decision making as a whole. He averaged over 3 a game, he had a turnover rate of about 19 and had 11 total games with 4 or more. And though he got better down the stretch in a significant way, there's still some need for improvement. He had too many moments driving into traffic or barreling over opponents. He'd get ahead of himself and lose his handle at times, and then he had some passes that got away, or he tried to make the spectacular play instead of the simple. His bigs and the context as a whole had his share of responsibility in these numbers being as high as they were, and he did make some real and necessary improvements in that second half, but as the game gets tougher in every way, taking care of the ball will be vital to survive as an initiator in whatever caliber or role he ultimately earns.
Won 3 out of 4. They turned it over. Trojans in the half court. Down by as many as 9. Collier turns it over.
SC up by 1. The freshman Collier wasn't there.
His touch and basketball acumen will allow him to be successful. That's coming towards you, Roxy.
Now, the biggest swing factor in his game comes from his three-point shooting, and related to that, his ability to play off the ball effectively. He ended the year shooting about 34% on 3 attempts and a little better than that off the catch, which is okay, but questions still remain given the lower volume, his 67% clip from the free throw line, and questionable touch in other short-range areas. Now, his balance and footwork were actually pretty good, and he can shoot it from NBA range, but he had misses all over the place. He can be a little stiff and short arm in the upper, but again, the base is at least a good start. Off the dribble, he shot sub 30% from deep, and being able to actually punish unders and drive from deep would open up his game a ton given his driving ability. Now, I wouldn't say his ceiling is much higher than league average here, both off the catch and off the dribble, but where he goes is going to dictate a lot about his NBA future, either opening up his game completely and allowing him to play with as many different teams and lineups as possible, or making it tougher for him to impact games at all.
Would bounce back and halves.
Now, would Harold Miner remember you from that matchup? Home.
Washington has not won the Pac-12 tournament since 2011.
Williams guarding Collier. A step back three from Collier is on the ball.
Now, related to the off the dribble 3-ball, he can also improve his in-between game, first in the pick and roll, punishing teams in drop with the pull-up and the floater, but also in having a good counter for what have been some predictable downhill attacks that we kind of touched on earlier. Even as teams played that threat first, he'd still default to using his body when he had the opportunity to get to something else, and it hurt him. Now, the great thing is that it hasn't been non-existent, and it's important to make that distinction, especially when comparing him to another lottery guard in this class who has done almost nothing in this aspect. Collier has at least been willing. He's shown a few snatches and pullback. He's got moments walking his defender down for a pull-up and the occasional runner, so it's not nearly as big of an issue as I felt it might be earlier in the year, but if he doesn't continue to parlay the downhill ability with more of this, he becomes pretty one-dimensional.
Perfect answer to Kobe Johnson's defense.
Collier, step back, hits.
Anytime USC starting to catch fire, they hit 4 or 5. Collier.
But so many players coming in and out of the lineup, missed time. Isaiah Collier missed a good chunk of the season.
Collier against Collins. Collier with the jumper.
To a deep run in Las Vegas next week. Collier with Larson on his hip. Larson, remember, has 4 fouls, and now he's got 5.
If you happen to get through that, get to the
Perimeter, and second time they found Keyshawn Johnson. Collier trying to go baseline, now around the screen, push shot in the lane, drop.
Now, defensively, there's just a whole lot going on. He did bring more engagement and awareness down a stretch that was a breath of fresh air, but there were apparent issues for most of the year that he's gonna have to get better at. He doesn't have the quickest speed on the perimeter. He had some better moments of resistance when he was fully engaged, but he still often gave up advantages at the point of attack. Screen navigation continued to be an issue, as we mentioned in the past, and his second effort was underwhelming. Off the ball, while he could make some plays in passing lanes, he definitely had some lapses, losing his man and resting. The rotations were flat a lot of times, and whether it was a conditioning issue or him taking on the offensive load, whatever it was, he just left a lot to be desired, and it popped in bad ways on film. Now, down the stretch, and funny enough, after he missed 6 games with a hand injury, there was more resistance using his frame and okay lateral foot speed to keep things in front. And most importantly, we saw a far more engaged player off the ball who made more plays and even covered up for some of his teammates' mistakes in a way that we never would have seen earlier on. Now, those same issues didn't completely go away by any means, but I do value the improvement, especially because their season was almost completely over by that point, and he still showed that he could get better. Now, overall, my expectations for him here aren't particularly high. It's going to be tough to fix some of those issues given he doesn't have a great wingspan. He's not the quickest laterally again, and he's also not a dynamic playmaker in any one area, but as long as he brings more of the guy we saw down the stretch, I think he can be passable with what he does have, and he should be strong and physical enough to avoid getting bullied on switches and a complete whoever offense target.
Silva driving, finds Lankin, blocked from behind.
former Washington State head coach Kelvin Sampson.
That's right.
With the Houston Cougars. You have a former Stanford assistant in Bruce Pearl.
No airspace. Johnson right in his grill. Good cut that time by Hadley, but he turned.
Collier is pretty clearly as point guard as it gets in this class, at least at the moment. I think he's going to initiate offense as his primary role, but given the threshold to do that in the league right now, where those supporting areas of his game go will dictate a lot for him. Defensively, I don't see him being too much more than passable, and depending on where he lands, he could be best served cross-matching depending on the game, so making an effort here is really important for his success. I think his ceiling is definitely higher than most of the players around where he's often mocked, because if he does hit on certain things, you have an easy top 3 offensive option on a good team. But on the flip side of that, if he can't do much else beyond the rim pressure and some playmaking at his size, it gets pretty difficult to find a rotation spot in a lot of places unless he's just special at it, especially if his team hasn't invested a top 10 pick in him. He'll likely land anywhere from about 10 to the early 20s, which is a pretty big range. I'd be on the higher side of that, and I really like Miami as a destination and think the possibility he ends up the steal of the draft is pretty high if he lands there. Toronto is the second one I really like for him, and then both San Antonio and Utah would make a lot of sense as well. Comparison wise, he reminds me of a bigger Ty Lawson in a lot of ways. I think his game would look something like that at his best. There's a little Eric Bledsoe in there, but he made 2 all defense teams. Little Dennis Smith Jr. in there too, but somewhere in that vein is probably what it'll look like in the NBA for him. While Isaiah Collier and USC had a season that fell short of the high expectations, he's still a talent worth betting on in this draft. It's probably going to take a minute to come together, and he'll need to work on supporting his advantage creation and playmaking with better off-ball play and defense to make a real impact as soon as possible and even exceed some expectations. But if a team is looking to take a creator, I think his name should still be well in that mix, at least more than it has been as the year has gone on.